Puerto Rican, and I live in Brooklyn. But when I was young, I often spent summers in my grandmother's house in Yauco, Puerto Rico. She had a lot of land deep in the mountains, so deep that roads would go off into the wilderness through narrow mountain passes, where cliffs were just a few inches off the tire, driving in pitch black. If a car came in the opposite direction, either they or you would have to drive in reverse until you found a place to pass each other. It was scary. The property has been with my family for a long time, and my family has been in Yauco as far back as anyone can recall. I used to spend a lot of time with my great-grandfather, Papito, who farmed the land and took care of some cows. He was very old. He was nearly 100% Taino indigenous Puerto Rican. From him, I would hear stories about the Indios who lived in the wilderness when he was young, who were not culturally assimilated into colonial society after hundreds of years of Spanish occupation. My family would often hide and harbor the culturally quote-unquote wild Puerto Ricans, culturally indigenous, because if Spanish locals found them, los matan, they would kill them. I had my first brush with mortality there at age 6 or so, crushing the jelly bean-sized eggs of salamanders I found in the brush and watching the pink underdeveloped hatchling run for cover on instinct. My grandmother told me what I had done was wrong, and I instinctively knew why. I was filled with cold shame, and I cried. Papito told me about strange flying discs he would see coming to the mountains and submerging into the lake. He told me about the spirits in the valley, that you could hear them, and to be careful walking around the road to the mountains at night on my way from his house to my grandmother's. He taught me how to control a bull with its horns and how to ride it. He did a whistle only he could do when he wanted to gain the attention of an animal on the mountain. That made them either follow him, go where he directed, or just settle down. He told me about the legend of Diego Salcido, which took place there in Yauco. When he was almost 100, Papito was dying, and all our family came to see him. He was a link to an old time, and so many people in Yauco knew him. They all went to his house, uncles, aunts, cousins, people from nearby, all gathered at his house on the top of the hill. I was too young to be present for his passing. I sort of didn't understand what was going on at the time. I was sent down to my grandmother's house to wait for the proceedings to be over. The sun was going down. The mountains were like shadows rising around me. Walking alone, I started to hear animals all about, crying out. Wild dogs all over the mountain. Chickens were making a ruckus. The pigs in the lower valley were screaming almost like humans. The cows were howling in a way that I can only describe as similar to Cat Stark from Game of Thrones when Robb died. Every single non-human thing in the mountain within earshot was wailing in a fashion that I've never heard before, nor since. As a little kid, you can imagine how frightening that was, especially because I was alone. I hid in the house, looking out the window waiting for my grandmother, listening to the animals cry. I was especially sensitive to sound then, as it had been a time in my life where I was often sick, and constantly on the medicine amoxicillin, which I was allergic to. It created this overwhelming extrasensory sound experience. At some point, all the animals stopped making noise. I was thankful. Before bed, I asked my grandmother what happened, why all of the animals were making that sound. She told me that Papito had just died, and that all the animals on the mountain had realized the powerful being that protected it for so long was gone, that they had seen his spirit pass, and it was sensible that this change would affect them very deeply. My grandmother's perspective was that the animals just know these things. I couldn't sleep. I went outside late at night, curious and scared out of my wits, thinking about the spirits that may be out in the darkness of the mountain wilderness, thinking about that terrible, painful lamentation that was embodied by animals crying like people. I went close to the edge of one of the small nearby cliffs that hung over an endless darkness, and I squatted and listened. I heard a sound that scared me, A feral yell in that darkness. I don't know what dog it was, or if it was a dog at all, but it was certainly too close, and I was by myself. It howled and yelped, and I regretted coming outside. I was sort of frozen there, afraid to move but afraid to stay. I wouldn't dare call out for my grandmother. I would be scolded for coming out and wandering around at night. She probably wouldn't hear me anyway. A moment later, I heard that whistle that Papito used to do, out in the darkness. The howling stopped. As a child, I didn't think, that couldn't be Papito, he's dead, like any adult in their right mind might. I thought, it is Papito. It had to be. No one else could do that. No one knew how to whistle that way in my family, and it was only us for miles around on the mountain. Where the sound came from, it would be impossible for any person to be, not even during the daytime. It was deep inside of the wilderness on the severe cliffside, but I knew he was there, as I'm sure that at that age, the line between life and death was blurred. Yauco is the area where Aguibana I, the chief of the Taino, lived. It is also where the rebellion began against the Spanish, with the drowning of the conquistador Diego Salcido. Many of the surviving Taino escaped into the mountains of Yauco and lived in secrecy there for a long time, hiding their lifestyle behind some of the more assimilated natives, like Papito. They say the Taino are extinct, but that cannot be. I knew some of them. I am one, if only a little bit. I've witnessed paranormal activity since the age of 7. I'm 26 years old now, and I experience the activity anywhere I go. It started with my sister and a group of her friends playing with a Ouija board when we were younger. My sister and her friends were between the ages of 10 and 12, and I was just 7. My grandmother told me that because I was the youngest and the most innocent of the group, something had latched onto me. I have many stories to tell, but I'll tell some of my shorter stories unless you guys and girls are interested in hearing more. My mom saw a black figure which looked like a person crawling on all fours with dislocated joints, coming down the hallway wearing one of my Halloween masks. And when my mom turned to face it, it just disappeared. She screamed my name thinking it was me trying to scare her. When she saw that I poked my head out of the day room, the added-on living room to our trailer, her face lost even more color. She had me go into my room and dig out a Halloween mask that was a skull faceplate with horns around the top. She said that the figure was wearing it and she wanted it out of the house. On 3 separate occasions, my grandmother had woken up to a little boy wearing an early 19th century sailor suit. And when she looked closer at him, she could see that his skin was pale and it was dark blue-black around his eyes and lips. Another time I was playing with my dog by throwing a blanket over my head and would pull the blanket off. My dog started to whimper and cry, and before I could take the blanket off to see what was wrong, I heard a deep, raspy male voice breathe heavily in my ear and then exhale. My dog then proceeded to freak out and bark. I'm now 26 years old, and I experience paranormal activity almost anywhere I go. So this happened when I was about 14 years old. My house is not haunted and never was, but I'm sure that in the first years after we moved here, when I was 9 years old, there was a harmless spirit that still lingered around that time. I was in our second bathroom washing my hands, and after I finished and wiped them with a cloth, I looked in the mirror. I had no expression on my face. I was just looking at myself, but my reflection kind of tilted its head, my head, to the right and gave me a big smile while looking directly into my eyes. I am completely sure I did not smile or tilt my head, and when I saw that, my expression must have changed to pure horror, but the face in the mirror did not. I ran out of the bathroom, but I noticed that my reflection kinda just stayed there. It didn't run away along with me. This never happened before or after, but it still has me thinking why this happened and how it's possible. Hey guys, just wanted to take a quick second and say thank you for all the likes, comments, subscribes, the feedback, and kind messages. I really appreciate it, and it encourages me to keep making more content for you guys. I know originally I said I was going to post about 100 videos this year, but I feel more motivated to go even beyond that because of you guys. So if you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to get updates on my newest videos. Thanks again.